Hilchas Tumas Meis Pedig Shleishasar. Kol tefach al tefach. Berum tefach kori oil k'mesha b'yarnu. So we learned earlier that to gather an oil means it has to be an area which is at least a tefach by a tefach, the size of the area, and it has to be also above the ground, at least a tefach. So it should be considered an oil on the ground. It shouldn't be considered like it's touching the ground. There's a something which is the shear of a tefach al tefach, and that is being mile, which means it's the height of a tefach. So nachmal, kol tefach al tefach, berum tefach, kori oil k'mesha b'yarnu. And once it's an oil, so the pashtus of an oil is v'choitzes b'fnei atuma. It prevents from tumah from going up. As we said, mes, the tumas hames is bekev ve'oila, but if it hits an oil, so the oil prevents it from going up. And also a mevius atuma. It causes that the tumah should spread out all under the oil. Now this din of an oil is ben shasol lahayel, whether you made it with the intent of being an oil, ben shnasim it happened by itself. It wasn't done by a man, it was done by the shamayim. Nevertheless, it became an oil, so it has the din of an oil. Is hareza mevi v'chaitzitz. It's mevius atuma and it's also chaitzitz. Keitzat echad chur shechareru mayim, that through water it became the whole. A shrotzim, a shechlosim malachas, a certain erosion, it became eroded. Or shetzavar avonim ekeris v'nase b'mchol tefach. You were making a pile of stones or of plank of wood, of beams of wood, and lepel a cholol tefach al tefach brum tefach occurred. You had no intent. So regardless, is areza oil or maybe v'chetzitz. Whereas an oil is not negeh if you intended to make it an oil and didn't intend to make it an oil. The fact is that if it's tefach al tefach berum tefach, it has the din of an oil, and the pashtus of an oil is that it's mevius atuma and it's also choitzes b'fnei atuma. Now, b'medvar mamurim that the oil is mevius atuma v'cheitzes b'fnei atuma, kshehoya oil chazuk ubari, which the Rambam will say what's the taich chazuk ubari. The oil was a chazuk ubari, so then it's mevius atuma and it's cheitzes b'fnei atuma. Avol eil re'ua, an eil which is considered an eil re'ua, it's a shvacha oil, is eini mevius atuma ve'eini cheitzes b'fnei atuma minatera. So minatera, it doesn't have a din of an oil, so therefore it's not mevius atuma, it's not cheitzes b'fnei atuma. Avol medivri seifrim is mevius atuma or ve'eini cheitzes. In order to Rabbanan were machmer that this oil should also be mevius atuma, but on the other end, to say that it's chesed b'fnei atuma would be a kula. So obviously it's not chesed b'fnei atuma. Since minatera, it's not really an oil because it's an oil re'ua, doesn't really have a din of an oil. So therefore, it's not chesed b'fnei atuma. Ketzad serige ilonis haseichim aloretz. You have branches of a tree that's extending over the ground, and that's like an oil. V'heina nekroim schoches. They are referred to by the word schoches, or ba'avonim hayotzis min hagoder. You have stones, you have a stone fence, and now from that fence is protruding stones, and they're also covering over the ground in which is protruding over. V'heina nekroim prois. So nachmos choches are the extension, the branches of the trees that are extending over the ground, and prois are the extension of a stone wall that's extending over the ground. So it depends. Im yechelum lekabel maziva beinis. There's a normal when a person builds a house, so you have beams of wood, and on top of that you also have plaster, sit. So you have plaster which is sit. Now there's a certain amount of plaster which you would normally put on top of a beam. So im yechelum lekabel maziva beinis ve'hein, if you would put that amount of plaster which you would normally put over a beam, and it would be able to still stand, in other words, it's strong enough to be able to hold up this level of plaster, which is maziva beinis, is harei elu meviyim v'cheitzim minatera. Then it's considered strong, and therefore it's mevius atuma and it's cheitzim b'fnei atuma, all on a minatera v'dika level. However, mein ruyin lekabel maziva beinis, if they're not really right to be makabel, a normal amount of plaster that you would normally put on this area, elahei neiflim, when you put that amount of plaster, they fall down. So then it's considered an oil ru'ua. And memela harelu mivim midivreim midrabanon. There's still mevius atuma, but on the other end, veinam cheitzim k'mei v'chein kol kiyetzeben. So that's the din. So nachamos. So what we learned till now was that a regular oil, which is an oil minatera, a regular oil, regardless if you made the oil intentionally, or if it just became an oil, or if it was done b'dei shamayim, so that oil is mevi v'choitzitz. But that's on the condition that this oil is an oil which has strength, which is chazak ubari. If it's an oil which is re'ua, so then it's only mevis, it's only midrabon and mevis atuma, and it's not choitzitz b'fnei atuma. What is considered an oil re'ua? So he says, benegea, this choch is uprois, a tree and the wall that's protruding, some of the stone from the wall is protruding from the wall. So the question is if it's strong enough to be able to carry the amount of plaster which is called maziva beinis. If that would be able to carry a maziva beinis, so then it's considered strong enough and it's mevi v'choitzitz. If not, so it's only mevi midrabanon ve'ini chetzitz. Now elu meviyim v'chetzitz. Now the Rambam is going to give you a list of elu meviyim v'chetzitzim. Kli'etz habo b'midah. So we learned before that a keli is not really chaytzis b'fnei atuma, but if it's bo b'midah, so in it's not mekabel tumah. It doesn't really have a din of a keli, a kli'etza bo b'midah, which means it's arboim so, it's mekabel arboim so b'lach. So so it doesn't have a din of a keli. So then it's also chaytzis. That's the din. Elu meviyim v'chaytzitzim kli'etza bo b'midah. V'chein klei avonim, klei glolim, klei adoma, haboim b'midah. So all these things that are boim b'midah, even though be'emes they wouldn't be makabel tumah even when they're not boim b'midah. But lepil they're talking not makabel tumah, but they have a din of a keli. Masha'inkin when they're boim b'midah, they don't have a din of a keli, and therefore they are chaytzitz b'fnei atumah. And also upshute kliyer, v'yiriya, v'sadn, umapetz umachsalas, shehin asuyin liholim. So in other words, when these pshute kliyer, and you read the insad mapo machzelas, they are all makabel tumah. The amas they're makabel tumah. Memela they have a din of a keli. But the chiddush is that since they were made into an oil, which will soon be in shein asuyin oil, which means they have walls, they're over walls, or they're on a slant, as we'll learn behemshach. So then, even though they're a kelim, nevertheless they're choitzes mipnei atumah. Is nachamal. We're talking about pshute kliyer. You know, there's a matler, for example, a leather mat. So it's mekabel tumah because it's mitame medres, and nevertheless, but if it's pshutikli air and it's made into an oil, so then it's chayz b'fnei atumah. Now there is a yiriya, which is a curtain, v'sadn, and a sheet, umapetz umachselis, which are type of mats. Mapetz is made out of gemi. In other words, they weave gemi together. Machselis weave kanim together, but the ikar they could be mekabel tumah. But now that they're being used as an oil, so then they're mevis atuma and also choytzim b'fnei atuma when they're asuyin liholim. Or ubehemes echayis ben tmeis ben teheris, so they also are mevis atuma and choytzim b'fnei atuma. Behemes echayis, which are alive, obviously, ben tmeis ben teheris v'hu she'ereish zu ben ragli zuva yakulun dvukis. In other words, there shouldn't be a half second between one behemoth and the other behemoth. So therefore the behemoths have to be next to each other. They don't actually have to be that the head should be in between the raglizu and raglizu. It just has to be connected. The raglizu and the rosh should be connected bein raglayim of the behemoth, and it should be touching the behemoth. In other words, the behemoth, the back, the head of it should be touching the area which is bein raglayim. It doesn't have to be the head; actually have to be bein raglayim. But it has to be kulam dvukas. They were touching each other. Is nachamal behemes ichayes ben tmeis ben teheris, v'hu sheyeh reish zu ben ragli zu v'hayakulam dvukas, or v'ha'oif sheshachim. If you have an oif that stopped, that's standing, and also it's being mild, so that's also an oil, just like a behemoth is an oil. And v'hachoited b'shibolim. A person goes ahead and there's a heap of wheat, and he goes ahead and he digs a hole in it. Mokim lekotten latzilim and Hashem, she puts in his little child to save him from the heat. So we over there's an oil. Or now this shibolim are not mekabel tumah because they weren't mukshar lekabel tumah. Or va'oichlin she'enon mukshar. Oichlin she'enon mukshar, he has food, a pile of food, which are not mukshar, and there's an oil under this food. So the food is an oil on top of him. Kedei sheli yitamu. Now why do we need she'enon muksharim? Because if they're mukshar, so then the mess which is under this oichel will be metami the oichel. Once it's metami the oichel, so even though it'll be maybe satuma, but it won't be chaytzim b'fnei atuma because the davar tamei is not chaytzim b'fnei atuma. Yirokes hamiskayim b'meisacham v'akshamim. So there are Yerokis which only Miskayim part of the year, so they're Bechlal not Choitzes. They're not considered an oil at all. They're not even Mevis Atumah, like the Rambam will say Behemshech. But these Yerokis, the Rambam is going to mention 4 of them, they are Miskayim inside Mesacham, inside Mesachsham. So therefore, Harein Keilonis, they'll consider like the branches of trees. And the Vice says they have wide leaves, and they're wide. So therefore, Umiviyam v'chetzitzin. So they bring the tumah and they're also chetzim from their tumah. Ve'elohein ha'erus is mint. V'hakisis, it's called bindweed. V'yarkis chamer and wild gourd. Udlas yivonis and Greek squash. V'chein haschoches v'aprois v'hazizin v'agzures. Now, schoches and prois we learned. Schoches were the branches of a tree, and prois were extended things that protrude from a wall. And obviously, it's talking about in a case where it's chazak ubari and it's able to carry maziva beinis. And vazizim is anything that sticks out of a wall, not necessarily as part of the wall. It's something maybe extended to the wall. And vagzuris is like a balcony that's extending from the wall. Vashevches is you make a shevach, apparently extending out of the wall, you make a shevach. So that shevach hangs over the ground. And v'hashkifin is things that extend from a mountain, that's an extension that protrudes from a mountain, and also it hangs over the earth, the ground. And v'asloim is also stones that extend from a wall. V'hanechirim, so the Ram Marach writes that in Nechirim should be read gechirim, which are also protrusions from a wall. V'hashnonim, shnonim is like this, like the teeth of a stone. If you have a large stone and things are sticking out from that large stone, that would be like the teeth of a stone. So b'kitzur, all these things, any protrusion that has strength and it's not a keli, so therefore it's considered a oil, and memela it's sai maybe it's a tum and chayz chayz b'fnei tum. Allah chadal. So these were a list of things which are mivian v'chaytzitz. In other words, they have a proper din of an oil. They have a proper din of an oil. So b'chlal, anything that protrudes, that hangs over the ground is considered an oil, unless there's either it's a keli. If it's a keli, so then it wouldn't be an oil. So over here we're talking about a keli above the midah, so it doesn't have a din of a keli, so therefore it is an oil. And also we were learning about pshute klier and yiriyah and sad and mapes machzelos, even though they are makabel tumah, but over here the chiddush is that when they're being used as an oil, and as we'll soon see behemshech, as opposed to when they're not being used as an oil, so they're sai maybe in sai chetzis. No, they don't have this din of a keli, which is eini chetzis b'fnei hatumah, because we're talking about something that's pshute klier. They're not a keli on makabel, and when they're being used as an oil, they're yotze from that teres of being a keli, and they have a din of an oil, and therefore they are sai maybe hatumah and sai chetzis b'fnei hatumah. Halacha daled ve'elu mivin v'lei chetzis. And ha'adam, we learned before that an adam is mevi and is eini chetzis. And al derez a klietz she'einam boim b'midah, because it has a din of a keli. Since it has a din of a keli, so it's mevi ve'eini chetzis. B'pnei shu kechol ha'kelim u'mistamim, and it's something that becomes tummy. And really, even if it doesn't become tummy, because lepeil a klietz is mistami as well. But we learned before that even klei avonim, you have to understand this mistamim, because we learned before that even klei avonim is mevi ve'eini chetzis. Now he says upshute kleier v'yiriyah v'sadin umapis umachzelas she'ena masuyin oilim. So before we were learning about all these things when they were made as an oil, what's that made as an oil? So either they're like on top of 4 walls, so then they're made as an oil, or even if they're not on top of 4 walls, but they're made in a way that they come down on a slant. In other words, they come down on a slant, so therefore the fact that they're an oil is nicker in the way they're set up. Mashiach over here, when you have, let's say, just this thing is being an oil, but it's not really set up as an oil. There's no walls and there's no slant. That's what I'm saying. Upshute klier v'yiriyah v'sadin umapetz umachzeles she'ena masuyim oilim elam metuchim belvad. They're spread out. Ve'en lem shipua. There's no shipua. They're not coming down on a slant. So that would show that they're an oil. And also ve'en shem kisol. There's no walls. So then they are maybe ve'eini chetzis, because they have a din of a keli. And also behema v'chayis shemesu, because they're tamei, and ve'echlum tmeim ein muksharim, because that's the rule shedavar tamei nechetzis. So that explains sai the behema v'chayis shemesu and sai echlum tmeim, And say if it's muksha lekabel tuma, because lepel, when it's acting as an oil, so memela is makabel tuma. Once it's makabel tuma, so it can act to be chaytzis b'fnei tuma. And also v'lechaim shel yad shariah b'chlal klei avonim. It's a klei avonim. So even though it's not makabel tuma, but lepel it's a klei avonim. Kol elu is mevium ve'enum chaytzitzim. So we had already two lists on our. The Ram gave us a list of those that are mevium v'chaytzitzim, and then there was a list of those that are mevium ve'en chaytzitzim. Halacha hey ve'elu le mevium ve'le chaytzitzim, which means it doesn't have a din of an oil at all. Which are they? Hazroim va'yirokis hamuchubarim lekarka chutz min arbi yirokis shemaninu. Those arbi yirokis shemaninu have a din of an oil mamish, and memela they're say mevium v'say chaytzitzim. These other Yisrael yirokis don't have a din of an oil at all, and therefore because they don't have a din of something that's going to last. And memela they're not maybe satuma, not even maybe satuma. Certainly they're not chaytzit b'fnei atuma. And also the kippas haborot, so a pile of borot. If you have borot that came down, hail, and they have like a pile of it, and memela now there's a kippa, so to speak. There's like a dome, and therefore it's being mild, but nevertheless, since it's borot, it's going to melt. So it doesn't have a din of an oil, or v'ashelik, that was the snow, v'akver, which is frozen water that came down, v'haglid, again, something that became frozen, for example, a frozen river, or v'hamelach, which is salt, which is also gonna melt away, v'hadoileg mimokim lemokim, someone that's jumping from one place to the other, so he's not an oil kavua, it's not standing in one place, this person is being doilig mimakim lemakim. He's jumping, or hakayfes mimakim lemakim. Doilig is when you jump with 1 foot. Kayfes is when you jump with 2 feet. 2 feet. Or v'ha'efa pireach, a flying bird. Or v'talus hamin afnefes. Or you have a talus that's blowing in the wind and it's blowing up. So now the talus is spread out as an oil, but it's not really there as an oil. It's just going to fall down when the wind will go away. Or a sfina, she shut up ne'amayim. If you have a sfina which is going on the water, so it's also a moving sfina, is kol elu le'mivim v'le'chetzitzim. Sha'afal pi sheheilu, they're right now being mild, aber ein elam miskayim, it's not going to stay there. So the rule is that anything that's moving, these things are pashtus, anything that's moving, these moving items, doilig, kaifetz, eifa pireach, talus amenafnefes, all these things are not there. There's no permanence there, and therefore they have no dinners of an oil at all. Now, kosher is asfina, Allah chavav, kosher is asfina, bedover shiyochel amida, or kavash knaf atalas be'evan, because he took the knaf atalas which is flying in the air, and he put it down with a stone. Now it's holding this talus to be spread out, so that is a reason mevias atuma. Then it is mevias atuma. Now it's not chaytzis b'fnei atuma, because a keli is not chaytzis b'fnei atuma. Masha'in came, it's mevias atuma. Halacha zayin neser shul tzof al pnei amayim, and v'tum tachas sidi ha'echad is a re'akelim shel tachas sidi ha'shenim teirim. Why? Shekvar b'yarnu shel sfina shashot einim meviatuma. So it's not any better than a sfina. Just like a sfina which is moving is not mevias atuma because it doesn't have any din of permanence. It's moving over the water. So in the same way, if you have a piece of wood, a plank of wood, which is not a keli, and it doesn't, but it's moving on the water. So again, it doesn't have a din of an oil. Halacha ches. So until now we had a case of mevian, to say it's mevian v'chetzitzin, and then there was mevian v'lei chetzitzin, and then there was lei mevian v'lei chetzitzin, because it doesn't have a different oil. Now there's a ches elu chetzitzin v'lei mevian. Meseches prusa is the weaver's loom that's spread out in order the chassis is set up on this Maseches prusa, which is the weaver's loom. And also the chavili mita, you have a bed, so they would set up the pieces of string rope from one side to the other, and on top of that they would put a mattress that would be holding up the bed. So that's the ropes of the bed which are set up. Or mashpelis were those things that they would use to take the fertilizer out, and it was set up in a manner that there were strings going across, and that would hold it. There would be strings going across, and there would be spaces in between those strings. And v'hasrika shebechalenis, if you have like bars on a window or shades on a window, so again those shades were made with things going down, and there would be space in between them, a bit of space in between them, and that's how it would go. So all these things, either maseches prusa or v'chavila mito or mashpelis or asrigas shebechalenis, So they are chaytzitzin v'lei mivim. So the Rambam teaches is ketzad den chaytzitzin shem hoye chalein ben shtei batim. If you would have a window between two houses, and the tumah is in one house. So normally the seder is that the tumah could go out through the window, as we'll learn in the next parak. The tumah will go out if there's a pisech tefach over there. The tumah will go out. And one of these things that he mentioned before, the Maseches Prusa, Chavilamita, they were set up. They were set up in that window. In other words, they were standing in that window. V'sosmei is afal pi sheyesh b'nei aver. Even though between one rope and the other rope, or one string and the other string, there's space. But nevertheless, harei lochetzitz. And as will Rambam will soon say, as long as there's no tefach of space in between one piece of rope and the other piece of rope, or one piece of the loom and the other one piece of the thread of the chassis to the other thread of the chassis, says harei lochetzitz. And therefore, v'lei tikonis hatumah l'bayishein. Abevahu shliyesh abesrigas elu ebeini amishpelis eben chevel lechevel pisech tefach. In other words, on the condition that there is no hole of a pisech tefach that goes in between them. In other words, as long as there's no hole of it, if there's a hole of pisech tefach, so l'chura it's poshet, then it'll go through. Mashenkin, if there's no hole of a pisech tefach between them, so then shimhoyish pisech tefach is tikonis be'atumah k'mishi yisbar. So the Rambam is saying over here in Nachamol that the din is that if you have the mashal, you have an oil, and that oil is made out of this bed, which the bed has strings going across. Now, in between those strings is very little space, less than a tefach. And so, you have an entire bed that's l'chur. If you exercise the din of lavud, so l'chur you have an oil. You have an oil which is a tefach bal tefach. You have more than a tefach al tefach. Nevertheless, you don't say oil. Lavud in order to be mevis hatumah. You don't say lavud in order to be mevis hatumah. And since there are holes over there, and there's no tefach al tefach of solid, a solid tefach al tefach, so therefore it's not mevis hatumah. That's the din number one. However, it is chaytzis b'nei hatumah. Now the tzir of chaytzis b'nei hatumah, the Rambam writes, being bias lebias, or knows by chalein. The Rambam doesn't say chaytzis b'nei hatumah. If the bed is lying, you know, the same way there would be maybe satuma, it would be lying horizontally. So in the same way, whether it be chaytzis satuma, the Rambam doesn't say it's chaytzis b'nei atuma when it's in a horizontal position. It's only chaytzis b'nei atuma. The Rambam is speaking in a vertical position. If it's next to a window, so in Mela, and it would normally be going from one house to the other house. So then it's chaytzis b'nei atuma. Masha'inkin, if it's taka in a horizontal position and it's going up, so that then is not chaytzis b'nei atuma because there are the holes there. Ma'aseh, the Rambam brings from the Rosh that if you have a marshal, the tumah is exactly under the places where there is, let's say, this rope, or there is this, let's say, those slats, and let's say, you have slats that are not that are thin slats, and in between them there's space which is less than a tefach, and then you have a tumah which is right under those thin slats. So he brings from the Rosh that the tumah wouldn't be oila. Then the tumah would, if the tumah would be under the open air, so then it would be oila. But if it would be under those slats, it wouldn't be oila. The Rambam doesn't say it. He brings it from the Rosh, he brings some others. But look, the Rambam doesn't tie choice clear over here. The Rambam just seems to be saying, and the Rambam doesn't even tie choice that it doesn't work in a horizontal position. The Rambam just says that it works in order to be chayz b'fnei atumah, and the tzir that the Rambam says is a chalein. The Rambam says, hasrigim shebachaleidus, v'hoye chalein ben shnei batim. He doesn't write being bias v'aliyah. He writes ben shnei batim, and v'atumah b'bayis echot. So then it's chaytzitz. He doesn't speak about a bayis v'aliyah. So the pashtus advarim is that over there it wouldn't be chaytzitz. It's only chaytzitz, just like it's not mevius hatumah under it because it has the holes. So al derech zeh, in such a position it wouldn't be chaytzitz. L'chura, that's the pashtus advarim.